I had to turn off my air conditioning to record today. I hope I don't die. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my 4-part documentary series on the history of the Winx Club franchise. It's not required viewing, but it will provide much more context for today's video. And also, I appreciate the views because they help me not starve to death. I gotta eat somehow, guys. Since you guys have enjoyed said Winx Club videos, I figured I would individually cover each of the dubs of the franchise. And so today, we begin this journey with the dub that most English-speaking audiences grew up with and thus are most familiar with, the 4Kids dub. 4Kids is infamous in the anime community for having butchered many beloved anime series, trying to pass them off as Western children cartoons, mainly due to the fact that, at the time, anime did not enjoy the relative mainstream appreciation it does today in Western culture, and also having to deal with the censors.
Remember, it's your rubber knife.
Weirdly enough, Winx Club was one of their licensed IPs, and so 4Kids took the series and attempted to transform it from the rather mature series it originally was into stereotypical girly programming filled with dated slang, plot points altered for little to no reason, and yeah, this dub had its own music, both in terms of background score and vocal tracks. Both are good, but this don't hold a candle to the original, but it is a bop. The 4Kids dub aired in the United States as part of the Fox Box block in June. As part of the Fox Box block. God, why? In June 2004. And also aired in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Eventually, 4Kids lost the license to dub and distribute the series in December of in December 2009, shortly before the start of the Nickelodeon deal. As such, Winx Club lost its main distributor in English-speaking regions. The Cinelume dub, known also as the Rye English dub due to its faithfulness to the original source material, is not nearly as well known, or at least wasn't before the glorious hellscape that is the internet. The Cinelume dub was actually produced for air in Singapore, while the rest of the English-speaking world got the 4Kids dub, though the Cinelume dub did enjoy some recognition in Australia during season 4, and then there was another company called Dubbing Brothers who specifically did the movies for theatrical Singapore release. I don't understand. For right now, though, we're gonna delve into the details of the 4Kids dub, its changes from the source material, and, well, I was gonna say tear it to shreds, but honestly, I'm still very fond of this dub. Yes, it is an entirely different beast from the original series, and gave a false first impression that would turn a lot of English-speaking audiences from even the Nickelodeon version, but seeing as how I grew up with this dub, it holds a special place in my heart. Of all the seasons of the show 4Kids dubbed, Season 1 boasts the most changes, and the biggest changes from the original source material. There are the basic things, like the characters all having their personalities dialed up to 11.
You are quite infamous.
That's the word on the street. Yo, if you plan to blow up more stuff, let us know ahead so we can bounce.
The goal was essentially to make the show be more silly and high energy, like 4Kids did to the rest of its catalog, in hopes to appeal to a much younger audience. While Winx Club was intended for kids primarily, it was also meant to have more mature subtext and storylines that could appeal to older audiences, which meant it was basically made for everyone. Everyone could enjoy this. And so that twinge of maturity and darkness was erased from the 4Kids dub. Now, I should say this issue is not at all on the voice actors, many of whom are icons many of us know and love today. The fault is far too complicated than to pin it on any one individual. Really, it's just a matter of circumstances and bad choices colliding into this perfect storm. Nuance! It's not just for people who aren't on the internet. That all said, I think we ought to praise two voice actors of this dub in particular. Lisa Jacqueline, who voiced Bloom, and is probably still my favorite portrayal of the character.
But all this happened so I could protect the Dragonfire. It was my responsibility. I'll do anything. I will do whatever it takes to get the Dragonfire back from the witches.
Actually, hold on. I think Lisa Jacqueline might be one of her... Because it's actually very common for voice actors to have multiple, pseudonyms, either for union reasons or just... It's just a thing that happens, so let me just make sure I have that correct. Oh, she's also known as Lisa Jacqueline Kaplan. Yes, Kaplan. Yeah, I got her name right. Yep, she cool. She great. And Lisa Ortiz, who voiced Musa in Icy.
I lost my mom when I was a kid, so today's always been kind of a bittersweet day.
I hate to be a total witch about it, but I'm very quickly running out of patience.
And later Digit in seasons 2 and 3.
How it might feel is irrelevant. In matters of love, perhaps, but in this kind of situation, what we need right now is data. Oh, you were right.
While the main plot remains intact in the first season, there are small changes in names of the worlds and meaning of terms. Winx is now not a word made up by Bloom.
What does Winx mean? Nothing, just Winx.
But the word for a fairy's magic.
Winx is essentially three things. First, it's your source of power, as in your strength and energy. And second, it's what guides you. Thirdly, it's like your magical identity.
Alphia is a high school rather than a college. The world of Domino is now Sparks, etc. These aren't necessarily bad changes, but they are telling of the loss of nuances in translating the series into a form which is more explicitly tailored to young audiences. If my brother could not slam doors while I'm recording, that would be great. I'm talking about very important things. Clearly. Oh, shut up, you agree. You clicked on this. That said, certain scenes are cut or rearranged. For instance, episode 1 begins with Bloom encountering Nut the Ogre and Stella in the park at the very beginning, whereas in the original, the fight was a bit further into the episode towards the middle. This is an understandable change, as a main character going through their morning routine before we witness anything interesting is a sinful cliche in any story. But other changes, like the removal of Riven's internal conflict exacerbated by the witch Darcy's power of illusions, read more as the removal of anything that could be considered too frightening for children. That, as well as the fact the episodes wound up being shortened to 18, sometimes 16 minutes, compared to their original 20-ish minute run times, sometimes 24 if you play with the frame rate a little. Because the more we can break up the episodes for ads, the better. I know the struggle. I know that struggle for kids. Get them sweet, sweet mid-rolls. It's definitely not a faithful adaptation of the original series, but it's also not terrible. In a way, I kind of enjoy the cheesiness of the 4Kids dub, even if some of the dialogue is...
It's fresh.
But after this, the changes would continue to minimize, though not necessarily because they were learning. While the first season of Winx Club was definitely enjoyable and told a concise story that you could invest yourself in, it didn't really give the other members of the club, specifically Flora, Musa, and Tekna, time to shine. And that is where the beauty of Season 2 comes into play. Season 2's main plot is more in the background, and while it does technically hold higher stakes than the first season, it also gives more room for character-driven stories all about, say, the death of Musa's mother, and her strained relationship with her father, the reason why Sky and Brandon switch places in Season 1, and a lot of new material to do with the new member of the group, Aisha. Aisha is the princess of Andros, a world nearly covered in ocean and home to mermaids. She is the fairy of fluids, meaning she can control not only water, but also, and more often, plasma and Morphix, a pink glue-like substance of her own creation, which she's able to morph into literally anything, from cannons to pulleys, and from nets to barriers. She has the best powers, basically. She is incredibly athletic and loves to dance, specifically because her parents were incredibly controlling in her upbringing, demanding that she remained isolated and live up to the traditional ideal of a young lady of noble bearing they'd placed upon her. She grew up incredibly lonely, her only real friends being the Pixies, who we also meet in this season, and so while she can come across as a tad antisocial at times, She's also incredibly lonely and often struggles with feeling out of place in the Winx Club when she joins. Out of all the girls, Aisha is easily the best written and the most interesting, and thankfully that depth is still present in the 4Kids dub. She's strong-willed and is always willing to do what she feels is necessary to protect her friends, and most importantly, her family and her planet.
My realm is in trouble. I have to go immediately.
We'll come with you.
Yeah!
Thanks, but you can't. I have to go through the ocean, and I have to go right now.
Aisha is not the type of princess we're used to seeing from the older Disney films, a very stuck-up archetype which Stella admittedly sort of falls into. From the moment you meet her, you know Aisha is one day going to be a kick-ass queen. In fact, there even comes a point in Season 3 where she's literally willing to die to save her planet.
It's my responsibility to save my world. Well then, we'll do it together.
And she would be a good queen, you know, if we'd stop resetting the girls' ages back to 16 every 5 minutes. The only real change to Aisha's character is her name. In the original Italian version, her name is Aisha. However, the 4Kids dub, along with literally every other dub outside of Italy, changed her name to Layla. This even stuck with the more faithful Cinelume dub when it eventually came along. Nickelodeon would return her name to Aisha, spurring some confusion among fans, but the true reason for the change is unknown, thus leading to speculation, but we got no time for that. So while the 4Kids dub kept making its changes to kidify the show, the changes were much more minimal compared to the first season. Even Musa's dialogue is not as cringeworthy in Season 2, and some of her lines actually have some fire to them.
Search and find a way to see where they hide the codex key.
Ugh, it's 2 a.m. Shouldn't you be hanging upside down in a cave somewhere? Bring it on, broomstick!
It doesn't really make sense in context considering witches in this universe don't use brooms, but I still love it. But where that "how you do, fellow kids" type dialogue definitely does not work is Lord Darkar, the main villain of this season.
What did you call me, fairy? Nobody calls me a loser. Nobody.
Darkar is actually an ancient entity called the Shadow Phoenix, which is the direct opposite of the Great Dragon. It was actually the master of the 3 ancestral witches, sending them to destroy Bloom's home planet of Domino, in the 4Kids dub Sparks, to steal the Dragon Flame, and only recently has Darkar been awakened. No real reason is given as to why, but the 4Kids dub did alter this background, though parts of it I kinda do admittedly like. In the 4Kids dub, Darkar has no real connections to any of the previous villains. Instead, he was originally a researcher by the name of Argilus who ventured into the underground caverns of Magix, referred to in the 4Kids dub as the Underrealm. He ventured too far, however, and arrived at a strange and ominous underground castle called Shadowhaunt, and it was here that a dark power called the Shadowfire dwelled, and Farragonda's description of it is actually kinda chilling and interesting.
The shadow fire flows through its halls, waiting for someone foolish enough to come down there. Someone who has merged with this dark force and become twisted and distorted and reborn as the Shadow Phoenix.
The angle of Argilus becoming corrupted doesn't really go anywhere either in the plot or thematically, but I do dig the concept. The idea of this power becoming sentient, carving out its own home and pursuing its own agenda, using the people who wield it merely as tools which can be twisted, mangled, and discarded, yeah, I very much like that. What I do not like is Darkar's dialogue.
Behold, fists of iron, eyes of fire, wit as sharp as a sword, not to mention pretty too.
As much as I enjoy Jason Griffith as a voice actor, the script and presumably his direction, it doesn't give him much to work with. Darkar goes from this ominous, incredibly imposing entity
Now speak or suffer.
to this wannabe edgelord, quite literally, considering he has razor-sharp claws.
Look, it's a bird. No, it's a man. No, it's Lord Darkar.
It really makes you wonder how much of an annoying fuckboy Argilus was while getting his PhD. I very much doubt any of his classmates protested him going into the Underrealm to get himself killed. I certainly wouldn't. This also leads to this weird pseudo-romance he has with Bloom, or rather, Dark Bloom. Towards the end of the season, Darkar needs the power of the Dragon Flame to open the gates to this other dimension called Relix, where the ultimate power resides. yeah, I don't know. I don't know how it's even more ultimate than the Dragon Flame, but let's just leave that alone for now, because that doesn't really matter right now. The season 2 finale rocks, y'all. It's so good. And I don't mean that sarcastically. Like, I genuinely love this finale. Okay, anyway. But while in the original, Darkheart turns Bloom into Dark Bloom to control her and make the job easier, in the 4Kids dub, he considers her a partner.
Time has come to activate the Codex, my dear. Hand in hand, we will seize the ultimate power.
My dear.
Over and over, the 4Kids dub reinforces the idea that Darkheart is romantically interested in Bloom. I guess to add more drama, considering there's been a decent amount of it between Bloom and Sky in this season. But he also has this weird ownership complex over Bloom.
I'm going to take Bloom back! You stay away from my girl! Bloom belongs to me!
The last episode of season 2 is even titled in the 4Kids dub, The Ultimate Power Couple.
You and me, the ultimate power couple.
Bitch, me too! The fuck?
I mean, it is an interesting angle on paper, but it also reinforces just how petty this version of Darkheart is. And I don't mean that in the fun way, I mean that in the, oh god, this is so stupid way. It's not truly an exploration of what an abusive, toxic relation looks like, as much as it's this weird add-on that felt like it wasn't fully thought through. Out of everything in this dub of season 2, Darkheart is most certainly the weakest link. There was also a minor change in the new transformation of the season, which technically isn't really even a full transformation, but rather is a power-up. Much of Season 2's story dealt with the girls overcoming their fears and personal flaws so they could strengthen their friendship to fully master convergence magic, which allowed them to put their powers together to create entirely new spells. Trust me, it's actually way more interesting in the older seasons than modern convergence. The cornerstone of this storyline came in the form of the Charmix, a special power-up for the magic Winx forms which temporarily boosted the Winx Club's powers. In the original dub, Charmix was earned when a fairy overcame one of their deepest fears, often connected to a personal flaw, and they came rather late in the season since, you know, you can't have them overcoming all of this in like 5 episodes and having them sit on their hands for the rest of the season. Instead, the 4Kids dub has the process be more introspective, where the girls must specifically overcome a personal flaw, be it an insecurity, or a fear of vulnerability, or just plain fear of rejection. While I do prefer the original reasoning for earning Charmix, as the fears were often inherently linked to these personal flaws anyhow, I do kinda appreciate the focus on the introspective aspect. So season 2 was a much stronger season overall, an improvement on the first season in nearly every way, and that seems to go for the 4Kids dub as well. The dub still has issues, but none as grating as they were in season 1. The 4Kids dub of the 3rd season is actually quite interesting, not for the changes it made, but rather for the changes it didn't make. The 3rd season by far experienced the least changes from the original version. Almost no scenes were cut or altered, and even much of the dialogue remained nearly identical to the original version, or at the very least much more serious than the rest of the dub's dialogue. The reason why is, again, left up for interpretation, but what is known is that the 4Kids dub of Season 3 came out before the season even premiered in Italy, half a year earlier in fact. You can see this in certain scenes where the animation seems unfinished compared to the Italian and Cinelume versions, and especially when it comes to Mia's hair. Mia had actually grown out her hair in the 3rd season, something I love thematically to show that the girls are growing up, and also aesthetically because Mia fucking rocks the long hair. This did mean, however, that new clips of animation were needed to update her magic Winx transformation with her long pigtails flowing freely. This animation, however, apparently just didn't exist when 4Kids took on the project, so they had to improvise. And by improvise, I mean bad Photoshop. Mia's photoshopped pigtails are entirely stiff, almost as if they were sculpted onto her head. They even did this for parts of the opening where Mia is seen from the earlier seasons with her short pigtails. Why was this footage even kept for the opening? Probably because they couldn't be bothered to splice in new, updated clips from Season 3. This even goes for the magic Winx transformations, where the girls suddenly change into their older clothes for the intros to their sequences. But these are relative nitpicks. 4Kids was presumably running out of money as they neared bankruptcy, and especially as the license to dub and distribute Winx Club was ending. which is incredibly ironic. It's precisely because this was a rush job that there wasn't really any time for 4Kids to do their usual routine of kidifying the show and altering its story, and so it winds up becoming stronger and more faithful to the original in the process. I mean, there is some of the usual 4Kids slang.
We're gonna be called Baltor High from now on. Isn't that so awesome?
But it's very few and far between. The only true difference between the original and the 4Kids dub is Valtor's name being changed to Baltor. Why? No one knows, though it notably is very odd considering his symbol, the mark of Valtor, is still a giant V. You know, for Valtor, not Baltor. Granted, as a kid, because of the name change, I always wound up interpreting the symbol as this weird face, kind of like the precursor robot from Jak and Daxter, but yeah. Season 3 also saw the introduction of Enchantix, the fan-favorite transformation and the first true upgrade from the Winx Club's base powers. Enchantix was referred to as the final transformation, though we all know how well that aged. But rather, it marks when a fairy goes from being just in training to becoming a full-fledged guardian fairy. It introduces not only gorgeous designs, stronger powers, and more powerful wings, but also fairy dust, which allows a fairy to break dark spells and miniaturize. Enchantix can only be gained when a fairy saves someone from their home planet while making a great, purely selfless sacrifice. Enchantix essentially required a fairy not to prove that they had the skill to wield such power, as they presumably would by this point in their time at Althea, but rather to prove that they deserve such power in the first place. 4Kids didn't change any of the ways the Winx Club earned their Enchantix, even Bloom, who got her powers through pure force of will. And yeah, while this is kind of bullshit the way that they explain it, they also make a note that her form is incomplete in every single dub, as sometimes she isn't able to transform, or her powers go out of control, or she's unable to miniaturize. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. What 4Kids did change, however, were the transformation sequences. 4Kids ditched the old soundtrack and scores entirely, introducing new music of their own, and their replacement for the original Enchantix song was a synthetic choir instrumental. Now, while I obviously prefer the original version, I kinda like what 4Kids did with this change. It certainly fits the epic nature of Enchantix, and it's a nice change of pace from them shouting about being the Winx every 5 seconds.
We are the Winx, we are the Winx, come join the club. We are the Winx, we are the Winx, we are the Winx, we are the Winx.
Okay, every 2 seconds. Four Kids also removed parts of each girl's transformation sequence, partially because they had to be cut down to fit the shorter instrumental song, and also because they probably found certain parts questionable. I absolutely adore the Enchantix transformations, but I can understand why 4Kids trying to water down the maturity of the series would remove parts overprotective parents would probably start screaming about, because overprotective parents be cray-cray. There was a strange part of this release schedule where the 4Kids dub went on hiatus for like 3 months, between late April of 2007 and late July, and again, the reason is unknown. During this time, 4Kids did what's called a Magic Moment series, marketed as a nostalgic look back as they aired older episodes. I can only guess it's because the later episodes weren't yet completed, but honestly, it kind of fit, considering it was after a pretty emotional arc where one of the Winx was nearly lost forever. Though while the 4Kids dub had, on a surface level, improved in most areas, it was only because of the aforementioned struggles behind the scenes, which would lead to the end of the Winx Club in most English-speaking regions until Nickelodeon came along. Originally, Eugenio Straffi intended for Winx Club to have an overarching story revolving around the girls growing up and becoming guardian fairies of the magical universe, along with Bloom discovering her origins and saving her homeworld of Domino, which had been destroyed when she was a baby. It is truly a coming-of-age story, and it was concluded in the 2007 3D animated movie The Secret of the Lost Kingdom, with Season 4 kind of serving as an epilogue, which, I mean, like, it was to make money, but I love Season 4 and I will defend it to my fucking death. The 4Kids dub would never truly conclude this story, as the dub ended with the Season 3 finale. After this, Rainbow revoked 4Kids' license to dub and distribute the series, as they'd had issues with their changes for a very long time. It wasn't long after this 4Kids went bankrupt, sealing the company's fate and the end of this version of the Winx Club most of us had grown up with. The more faithful Cinelume dub, however, had only aired in Singapore, and like 5 minutes in Australia for Season 4. Most were unaware of it unless they lived in those regions or went hunting for the dub online, and so the end of the 4Kids dub spelled Winx Club's failure to gain a foothold in English-speaking regions as its true self, rather than the heavily altered, Americanized version 4Kids had transformed it into. A short while thereafter, Nickelodeon and Rainbow struck a deal to dub and co-produce the series, and while most of you presumably know how that turned out, if you didn't, feel free to check out my recent 4-part documentary series as I mentioned at the beginning, link in the cards and descriptions below. Keep me fed, please and thank you. It was most certainly a huge step down from what came before it. While thoughts on the 4Kids dub are mixed, I don't hate it like you might expect me to. I actually kinda love the dub for the weirdly Americanized, incredibly juvenile hot mess it is. It's the version of the show I grew up with after all, and so it will always hold a special place in my heart. It's really its own beast compared to the original, and so while I don't think I'm currently able to forgive it for starting the domino effect and giving the franchise a hellish journey through English-speaking regions, I still have to be grateful for it making me love the show as much as I currently do. That said, if you have not seen the show before, but you decided to watch this anyway, I highly suggest you check out the Cinelume dub first, as it's the most faithful to the original Italian version, and the fact it's actually the best dub to date and my personal favorite. I'll actually be touching on that version in my next Winx Club video, so definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. As much as I do recommend at least giving the 4Kids dub a shot just to compare the two, it should not be your introduction to the franchise. Rather, it can serve as a fun, neat little alternative. But both the Cinelume and 4Kids dubs are all over YouTube. For Cinelume specifically, just type in Winx Club Rye English and you'll find it. If you enjoyed this little analysis of the 4Kids dub of Winx Club, then you can support the channel not only by checking out my other content, including the documentary Please Keep Me Fed Please, but also by subscribing and ringing that bell for notifications because YouTube hates creators. If you're able to and would like to, you can also pledge your support over on Patreon and or check out the link to my work in progress curse book in the description below, God help me. I'm Unicorn of War and this has been a shit show.
Now you'll have to talk to the hand! 'Cause the face don't wanna hear it!